Welcome to the Heart Centered Life podcast, a podcast that helps you cultivate a life where intellect, emotion, and intuition align. Each week, we bring you tools, resources, or guests to help you find that space where your true happiness resides and encourage you to meet the world's deep hunger from that place. Because we truly believe that when your deep happiness meets the world's deep hunger, miracles happen. I'm your host, Elena Boyd. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Heart Centered Life podcast, where we bring you tools, resources, and guests to help you find a place where your deep happiness resides and inspire you to meet the world's deep hunger from that place. Because when your deep happiness meets the world's deep hunger, miracles happen. Some of you may know that we have just started season 2 of the podcast, where each month we explore different themes that support heart-centered living. Our theme for this month is adventure and how we can embrace growth as we embrace new challenges and venture into uncharted territories in life. Often the word adventure paints a very specific picture, that of venturing into the unknown, of going outside our comfort zone, and of exploring new terrain. However, in this coming week, I would like to challenge you to experience the adventure of being still. What and who would you see? What would you hear? What kind of smells will fill you? Use our June adventure map to document all of this, and I promise you, you will look back at your map and cherish the adventures you had just by being still and taking things in. There is just so much magic in being still, and I would love to hear from you what new worlds open up for you when you stay still and the kind of adventure that unfolded for you. Today, we have with us Lee Chambers, an environmental psychologist, well-being consultant, and the founder of Essentialized Workplace Wellbeing. Lee had spent the last 10 years focusing on well-being and performance in the local government, corporate organizations, and in elite sports. And today he brings this experience and qualifications with the aim to impact the well-being of thousands of individuals and businesses. Welcome to the Heart Centered Life, Lee. I'm so pleased to have you here today. Lee, I know you've overcome quite a lot to come to a place where you're truly happy with where you are and making an impact on the lives of the people and organizations you work with. Can you tell us about some of the challenges you faced and overcame to get where you are today?
Okay, yes. So to give a brief overview, I had a good upbringing where my parents worked hard to make sure that I had a roof over my head and food on the table and a few presents at Christmas. And through my childhood, I was identified as being quite clever, and my parents wanted me to be the first one in the whole family to go to university. And I managed that and obviously felt very proud. But at university, I did face some challenges, and I kind of hit the first challenge in my life where I started to struggle a bit with the transition from a child to an adult and started to struggle with the responsibilities of my studies and digging that bit deeper, having the emotional intelligence to understand who I was as a man as I started to develop my own life and my own freedom. And those mental health challenges led to me isolating myself and being taken home by my parents. And in some ways, that challenge has helped me develop and grow as a person. I also was made redundant from my graduate job and lost my graduate professional training due to the credit crunch. And in 2014, I lost the ability to walk due to illness, which was the biggest challenge I've faced. And yet, as a challenge, has helped me overcome and grow as a man and as a father and a son.
And I know that during your illness, it was for quite a significant period of time. Um, you decided to pursue an additional degree in environmental psychology, and that degree was intended to complement your qualifications in performance nutrition and sleep practitioner.
Yep, that's correct. And it really helped me as I gradually got back on my feet and went through the rehabilitation. In so many ways, it was important for me to start to understand how my environment around me would impact on my own health and the levels of stress, but also to help me and give me an understanding of how we as humans psychologically react to our environments. And I wanted to know more about the benefits of nature and how we could design urban environments such as homes and offices to cause less stress to us as humans and actually be regenerative to our well-being. And I'm very much of the opinion that as a human, our bodies and our minds and our spirits are all very much interconnected. So for me, it was really important, and I have quite a passion for learning more and more about those areas so I can provide a service to my clients that looks at a lot of different areas rather than just focusing in on one thing, because when
Mhm.
we look to optimize ourselves and improve and understand ourselves, it's really vital that we look how interconnected we are as humans rather than just looking at one area in isolation. Because if we make small changes in a number of areas, they compound together to help us get into a better place, to get closer to our potential, and to really gradually increase and incrementally spiral upwards together.
And so, environmental psychology really is uh, the psychology of making sure that the external environment supports psychological and emotional well-being.
Yeah, and that's a massive part of it, and that's the part that I really focus on. And I do have contemporaries who work around the benefits of nature and nature to human interaction and human to nature interaction, and also some contemporaries who work around the pro environmental behaviours, what affects them, how social norms and values and group theory cause people to either take sustainable decisions or to think that climate change doesn't exist, and how we can promote those given that there's lots of cultural considerations, lots of different and competing news outlets reporting different things, and people tending to have biases one way or the other, and how we can look to encourage those behaviours so more people are in a position where they're considering the planet and considering other people, sometimes that are a long way away, but actually starting to think of the whole world rather than just a very small view of themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important worldview to take because with globalization, no one and definitely no society or country is existing in isolation. Everything that we do is going to create externalities that's going to affect other people and other environments. And I think what you're doing is really important, making sure that we are aware of how our individual activity affects the environments of other people and other communities. Can you talk a little bit about what sleep practitioner is and how that fits into the larger body of work that you are committed to?
Okay, so a big part around sleep is how important it is. Really, it's the cornerstone, the foundation of human health and human performance. And it's something that we spend around a third of our lives doing. And it's a complete necessary place of recovery. And sleep can't be replicated through any other bodily process. And sleep has only really been looked at from a scientific perspective since the 1940s, the original Stanford sleep studies. So it's a very, very new science. And yet every week there's probably 10 studies looking at different elements such as chronotypes, sleep environments, how our cycles change, circadian rhythms. And it's a real interesting area of study. I mean, my big focus is around sleep behavior and sleep environments. So helping people to understand how valuable sleep is, how important it is, how if we get an optimal level of sleep for us, we will perform at a higher level cognitively, we'll be aware, we'll be mindful, we'll be able to use much more of our capacity. And in so many ways, people who are underslept, and so many of us are in the Western world, we've gone from 10 hours of sleep to 200 years ago to 6.7 hours as an average. And physiologically, we haven't changed. We still have a need for a significant amount of sleep. And what that leads to is many people who are underslept, suffering from many health conditions caused by lack of sleep, because sleep affects every biological and neurological process in our bodies. And a lot of our hormone regulation, emotional regulation is controlled by how well slept we are. So people who are not well slept, especially in the workplace, they tend to be much more likely to fall into conflict, much more likely to make mistakes and have accidents. And simply, they struggle to focus and have the attention that they need to carry out the daily tasks that they need to do at work. But this then tips over into the relationships at home, where their emotional regulation is poor and therefore they fall into conflict with the children. They lack patience, they lack understanding and empathy, because the brain is it's almost clouded because they've not had the time to recover. And the neurological processes, they are limited when we are underslept. So for me, a big part of my work is helping people to build sleep environments that promote better sleep quality and better sleep quantity. So bedroom design, all the way through to things like sleep awareness, understanding how to control our anxiety, how to use mindfulness and meditation to get better sleep, looking at strategies of how you can disconnect and wind down through routines in the evening, and making sure that you're consistent with your sleeping, not consuming too much blue light, not consuming too much alcohol or caffeine near bedtime, looking at what things like smoking and drinking do to your sleep cycles, and really just helping people to come up with systems, strategies, and actionable ways to improve the sleep, both the quantity and the quality. They have a better quality of life every day and better long term health outcomes in the future.
I love that. Um, yeah, I think we have studies after studies that have shown how important sleep is for our day to day activity, but also on a long term basis. I think there is some studies that have linked the onset of Alzheimer's to the lack of sleep in your younger years. I think the sleep eliminates a lot of the protein deposits that eventually, the accumulation of which leads to Alzheimer's. Um, so I think I agree with you that sleep is definitely something that we all need but don't take seriously enough. You had mentioned blue light and and music. I think you had said beats, binaural beats that actually promote better sleep. Can you elaborate more on the kind of environment that would promote better sleep as a general rule? I've heard that putting up red lights or dim red lights in the room promote better sleep, and is that true?
Yeah, so to kind of explain and while keeping it relatively free of too much complex science, blue light stops our melatonin production, melatonin is vital for signaling to our body to reduce our core body temperature, which then helps us drop off to sleep. So blue light, that particular spectrum of light, it stops our melatonin and limits that, therefore making it harder for us to get to sleep when we try. So red lights have much, much less blue light in, which is why you will find rooms that have red lights in as people try to block the blue light to make sure that the melatonin production is not affected. Now, a massive part of going to sleep is that our core body temperature drops by a few degrees as we move from wakefulness into sleep. And things that keep that core body temperature too high make it much more difficult to get into sleep and then affect our sleep quality. So, having your room at an optimal temperature is vital. Now, everyone is bio individual. So, we all have our own specific temperature that would be perfectly optimal for us. And in many ways, the only way to actually find it is to experiment with our thermostats and really see exactly where it works for us. Obviously, people wear different levels of pajamas. Now, pajamas for some people are great. For other people, they don't find them particularly comfortable. The most important thing that I advise my clients is not to dress up like an Arctic hunter because you'll stop yourself being able to regulate your temperature in the night. Now, our sleep relies on our temperature being regulated, which is why you can wake up and find yourself sweating when you've been trying to regulate your temperature from getting too hot, or you can wake up absolutely freezing because you've been fighting to try and keep yourself warm. So again, it's vital that you have a constant temperature that keeps you in a state where you're regulated. Other environmental considerations are how light our skin has light sensors in, so our rooms need to be really dark. And my level of advice generally is so dark that you can't see your hand in front of your face. And that darkness again is about the fact that our skin can sense the light and therefore blocks a certain element of melatonin production. Now, when we look at other things such as the environment that we sleep in, it's important not to have things such as bills that'll put you in a different frame of mind rather than winding down to sleep. If you've got television, that works for a small amount of people to have some background noise. For some people, it does work, but generally, it's of a detriment to your sleep quality to have things that you don't associate with sleep. So if you have things like ultimately piles of clutter that walk into your bedroom and they can really give you that feeling of, oh, okay, so I've got things to do. If you've got things in your bedroom that make you feel like that, they're not helping you disconnect and get ready for sleep. You're also looking at really a mattress and a bed that's supportive, pillow that works for you and puts you into a sleep position that's comfortable. Because again, you're going to be there lying down for 8 hours. It's absolutely vital. We all at work have chairs that we sit in for 6 hours a day. They're ergonomic, they're adjustable, they're, they cost hundreds of pounds. They're designed to fit our desk perfectly so that we don't get musculoskeletal injuries. It's very much the same for your bed. We spend more time in our bed than anywhere else, more than our car, more than our chairs, more than anywhere. So it's absolutely vital that we invest in a good quality bed that's really bespoke to our needs. And that's a big part of the environment is that you need to be comfortable. You need to be comfortable temperature wise, sensory wise, such as noise and light. You just need to consider that to get into sleep, all your senses are off. So you need to be in an environment which lets you fall away, disconnect from being awake, disconnect into sleeping.
That's such good advice, and those are a lot of actionable strategies. I did have one question when you mentioned that you mentioned the television in the bedroom. A lot of people, especially people who are on call often, they go to bed with their cell phones right? And they put the cell phones right next to them, or somewhere in the vicinity. How much do things that produce electromagnetic waves, like cell phones, affect the quality of sleep?
It's in a very early stage of research to get to understand how the waves affect us. But what we do know is that research from the mobile phone company themselves shows that people who look at the phone the last thing before they go attempt to go to sleep at night take statistically longer to go to sleep, as you're still activating your mind while you lay in bed, loosening that association between lying in bed and disconnecting. And again, so many people then wake up and look at the phones in the morning instead of going into their own world and maybe having some silence or some prayer or some meditation to really focus on themselves, to do a bit of reflecting, to consider what they want, they fall into their work emails or into news or social media. And the first thing they do in that day is fall into someone else's world. And that might well be quite negative. And that starts your day off. The first thing that you do is negative, and that doesn't put you in a good frame to really push on and progress for the rest of the day. And again, if we wake up by an alarm, well, the first thing we actually experience is an intrusion of our privacy. And if we keep pressing snooze, then we're effectively lying to our subconscious because we promised to get up at that time. And yet we keep telling it that, oh no, just a bit longer, just a bit longer. And in so many ways, we have socially defined wake up times, whether it be for school or for work or for something that requires us to get up at that time. And we all have different sleep chronotypes. So some people work very effectively very late and then want to sleep in later. Some people struggle working effectively in the evenings and but find themselves at 4 o'clock in the morning very alert and very ready. So it's sometimes about finding what really works for you. Culture hasn't really caught up, and still everyone has to start work or school at 8 or 9 o'clock, no matter where they work best. And I think that possibly with what's happening at the moment in the world, there might be more flexibility about getting people to be working at their optimal time. But more ever than not, it's really important because your evening, it counts twice. So if you have a good routine and you have a good sleep environment and then you get to sleep, what actually happens is the following day will be a good day. You won't be struggling with the sleepiness. You'll feel good. You'll feel positive. You'll go through. And then by the time the next evening comes, you'll be ready to go to sleep again because you'll have had a positive day and you'll kind of roll through and get progress. So in many ways, your PM, it counts twice in terms of your development and actually spiraling upwards. So it's really vital to be able to disconnect in the evening and set yourself up for a good night's sleep.
I love that. We always think that the environment affects our waking moments, the time that we are at work, the time that we are awake. And I think we do not pay enough attention to the environment that affects how we sleep. I do want to ask a separate but related question to the role of environmental psychology in our well-being. Um, with the situation post COVID-19, and the reopening up of the economy in many places, there is so much talk about restructuring uh, the space in which we interact. So restaurants, workplaces, there's a lot of calls for having more distance between people. How do you see the role of environmental psychology play in the post um, COVID 19 rearrangement of physical spaces, for restaurants, workplaces, and shopping centers where people actually congregate? What role does environmental psychology have in this restructuring, if any?
Yeah, I definitely think that from a psychologist's perspective, we do have a role to play because one of our environmental considerations in workplaces and places where people meet is around the density of people and the density of design. So naturally, we have become very valuable of our space, and people are more acutely aware now of how distant they are. People want more personal space, and yet in certain scenarios, people are very much and have been crammed closer together. That's obviously something that's now going to be looked at more and more because for the first time, we've had a scenario where people are actually going to be actively trying to distance themselves. So when we look at office design, we actually look at density because depending on the industry and the job and the space we've got to work with, people need their own personal space. If people are crammed too close together, it causes tension, it causes aggression. I think a great example to have in this regard is when we're driving on the motorway, on the highway,
Oh,
and
yes.
we hit traffic and suddenly we're congested. We're all close together in a very little personal space between the vehicles. What actually happens is it can almost trigger the flight or fight response, except we can't go anywhere. So we can't flight. So we naturally trigger the fight response, which is what causes road rage in traffic and congestion and queues and causes people sometimes to inciting behavior, which is way beyond what they would normally consider rational. And sometimes that can actually happen in offices where people are so close to each other that they actually feel the space is invaded, don't feel like they have that, that distance between them. And it's important that people are not so isolated and in solitude that they can't work effectively because many jobs need collaboration, communication, and teamwork to be effective. But I think in many ways, especially with the fact that many companies are going to be more agile to the fact that people could potentially work flexibly, maybe some hours or some days, that offices will become a little bit sparser, become a little bit more distant. Things like restaurants, they may reduce the density slightly and find more creative ways to have people feel that they're not sat on top of by other people. And there's a lot going round around kind of like markers that show distancing on the floor and just more visual cues so people are aware. But what's happened is it's become a behavior that's now becoming ingrained in people. For over 2 months now, they've been looking and seeing how far am I away from the next person, visually measuring it in the minds. And that's not something that's just going to go away because it's those behaviors repeated start to almost fuse with who we are. They become part of our subconscious, and people are going to be have a lot more sensory acuity to other people around them, to distances, to physical contacts. And I think that in terms of businesses, they're going to be looking at it not only as how can we space things out, but in future pandemics, will we be ready and agile to make sure that we don't have to make considerable changes to how we work? Because for so many establishments, isolation has caused them to close. And yet, if they were able to find more innovative ways, it might not be so much of an issue in the future. And again, through crisis, we do become more innovative and creative. And given that design sometimes doesn't take into account the environmental psychology factors, I'm hopeful that in the future that is definitely more of a consideration when we're designing spaces that people inhabit.
So, do you think that in the future we are going to need bigger workspaces to accommodate the same number of people, or if we are working with the same amount of space, we might have to maybe rotate people coming into work and have maybe half of the office on, say, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and the other half on the other days.
Yeah, I think that more companies will embrace flexible working, and I feel that they will be more creative with the space. And naturally, businesses look to reduce costs where possible. So there'll probably be more considerations for actually trying to promote more remote working and almost reduce office space while still reducing overall density. And I think another consideration is that there'll be start to be a smaller but more robust move towards looking at building domestic properties with a consideration that there's a high likelihood that someone will need a workspace there. So homes with offices built in mind.
So you're going to see a lot more remote working post COVID 19. Can you talk a bit about the environmental considerations that people who are going to see themselves work from home more and more are going to have to take into account in designing that workspace or work or the home office?
Yes, certainly. And it's something that I've been doing a lot of advising on for clients over these past few months. So this has been a massive change with so many people for the first time educating, working, relaxing, living, and sleeping, all quite possibly within the same environment, the same four wall.
Exactly.
And that change has led to a lot of people having to consider how to do that effectively. So, my main advice to anyone who's looking to work from home long term is firstly to designate a space for work. So, somewhere where you can build a small element of atmosphere and a small environment that feels like work. So, a desk and an upright chair, possibly try to invest, if possible, in a chair that's suitable for work, given how long you might possibly be spent in it. But it's really important in that environment to, if possible, partition off or move items around so that when you're in that space, it feels like work. So there's not toys or clothes or admin that is taking you and disconnecting you from your work. So you're actually in that space and you're working. So what we generally do is look at how to routine and schedule so you feel like you're working. So we suggest that you get dressed in something that you consider work like that triggers our enclosed cognition, which means we actually change slightly our frame of mind depending on what we're wearing. So we should always wear something that's work like for working and pajamas for sleeping, not pajamas for working, because then we start to lose that association. So I suggest to my clients to put the clothes on for work and to walk around the block or even walk around the garden. So they feel like they're leaving home, locking the door, walking round, unlocking the door, and walking into work to simulate a commute and to move you from one state to the other. Then to schedule Yep. Then to schedule your day into time blocks, into bite-sized pieces. We have ultradian rhythms, which are like smaller circadian rhythms. They run 60 to 90 minutes, and they allow us to work deeply on a task for that period of time. But we need to disconnect roughly every 2 minutes for every 60 that we're on. So we need at least 5 minutes to disconnect after we've done a task. So if you don't, then what happens is we gradually run up and we burn out because we've not disconnected. But it's really important to make sure that we keep disconnecting, and that involves coming away from technology, doing something mindful, whether it be meditation or just preparing some food or doing a little bit of light housework where you're just disconnected from work for a minute. Walk around the block, do a few exercises, just listen to a song. It just removes you and disconnects you from work so you can reconnect to the next task. And that ability to disconnect and connect really helps you then in the evening when you finish work and you can then disconnect from work and move into the next part of your day. And also, what we do advise is looking and really scheduling a dinner time in to get outside and get some sunlight in your eyes, to get the breeze against your face and get your senses going. Take the walk and get your blood pumping. It really helps with productivity and creativity as we look to avoid the afternoon drift because we are still polyphasic creatures and are designed to sleep in the afternoon. And if you're able to take a nap, then it really does give you a massive amount of clarity to go forward in the afternoon. We'd suggest up to 20 minutes, because after 20 minutes, you go deeper into your sleep cycle. And if you wake up after 20 minutes, you'll generally feel quite groggy initially. So that's another idea that we use. And then at the end of the day, have a digital sunset in your designated workspace, put your work things, just let them be there, and then go and do something in the evening. Spend time with your partner or your children, or just go and disconnect from work. It's so easy to just work all the way through. And then finally, it's just the relationship aspect. So make sure that people communicate when you can't be disturbed, to make sure you set up in an area that's not a high traffic area. So you're constantly being disrupted by people, and to set some ground rules. So how do you want to be communicated with at certain times? That there's not an expectation that because you're at home that you can do all these other things because you're still working. And just to have that appreciation that in so many ways you're not as flexible as it appears because you're actually still working, and you still got to try to maintain some of that office atmosphere by contacting your colleagues and discussing the challenges of your industry, the collaboration that you need to do to get projects in. And it's a slightly different dynamic because if you don't see your colleagues in the office, you don't always know how they're doing. Like an email might come through and you feel like it's quite unjust. It sounds quite rude. And yet you can't see that your colleague has had a number of phone calls in the morning that have got them quite anxious and quite angry or frustrated. In the office, you would see. But because you're working remotely, there's always that consideration that sometimes communication can be quite challenging. But it's really important to have certain elements of communication for different things so you can always have and know what's urgent and what's not.
I love all of that. And it sounds as if what you're suggesting is as more and more people work at home, what's required is this mindset shift towards being more mindful about our working environment and separating that from our living spaces. And I think that's one of the most difficult challenge that we face. I like the idea about that you said about getting up in the morning and then putting on your work clothes and then taking a walk in the garden or around the block. Because I think a lot of us, me including, we were not expected to be physically present at work unless you have like maybe a online meeting where you see someone else on a video like a Zoom call. There really isn't a reason to get dressed. It's so easy to get up in the morning and then move from the bedroom right to the computer. um, and with laptops, sometimes you even bring the computer into the bedroom. So I think it's really important to be able to separate those spaces. um, I think for me it's been really hard because regardless of where I go, my daughter always finds me. So it's hard. It's very hard to find that space, and it's almost like we have to have a space where you can almost maybe lock the door. And I've heard of colleagues. I teach full time, and I've heard of colleagues, teaching from their closets so that they can have that uninterrupted space where their kids won't be able to find them. So I think it's a huge challenge moving from pre to post COVID-19 for a lot of us. And I think everything that you've said is so important uh, in helping us navigate this space. Um, what are your plans from here on? I know you have your business essentialized, which is providing the strategies and the processes that we've talked about in this podcast. But where do you plan to go from here? And what are some things that you think need to be in place for you to get there?
So for me, a big part of looking at what we do is helping companies to become more conscious of the stakeholders and look at and take a more holistic view of business. So the big challenge is that for well-being and delivery at the moment, much of it is focused on today's problems and trying to solve them now. And a lot of my focus is how can we build cultures and communities where they embed well-being, and that allows me and my contemporaries to look at the challenges of the future and start to try and prevent those today. So, as we move towards a more person centric society, as we move towards employees going onto balance sheets, as we move towards automation, biotechnology, changing the way that we work and the way that we live, will be new well-being challenges in the future. As COVID has come, this is a whole new well-being challenge for us, one that at the start of the year, very few people would have predicted would happen. And yet, as a race, we're not really the best at preventing things. We are very agile, dynamic, and innovative when the crisis hits. And my job is really to look at how we can build company culture, organizational values, and really communicate those through to help companies become more sustainable, to help leadership become more conscious and look at society, their employees, the partners and collaborators, their investors, and the customers and clients, and try to give all of them a service that makes a difference, to have a business that has a purpose and has values that are communicated and that really changes the world for the better. And as we move towards a place where, at the moment, the 200 richest entities in the world, over 150 of them are companies. So the days of the financial power of nations and states is gradually decreasing. It's going to be companies who gradually start to shape the world and develop solutions to the challenges we have, human health wise, humanity wise, planetary wise. And I want to be part of the pivoting of the evolution towards looking at how companies can take a very much a wider view on both looking after their employees' health, but also considering the bigger picture and not just looking at things in terms of isolation and short term profits, but in terms of longer term investment in the whole of the business structure and cycle.
I love that, Lee. There is so much I wouldn't say so much, but there is more focus on the social enterprises and social entrepreneurship. And I think that you are right in that there will come a point in time where the role of governments and uh, even nonprofit organizations and foundations are not going to be able to impact the world as significantly as private enterprises. And so important. Your worldview is so important in that uh, companies need to focus more on long-term sustainable goals taking care of the employees and making sure that they are impacting the world in a way that generates positive change as opposed to just focusing on profit maximization. And I think it's an important role that you will play, and it's an important conversation to have.
Yeah, and a big part of that comes from my own journey and the challenges that I faced have taken me through some difficult periods in my life, but I was proactive and took ownership. And when I struggled with my mental health, I built myself back up and started to understand myself and didn't feel sorry, but actually thought I need to find out who I am, what my purpose is. And similarly, when I was made redundant, I looked at that again and thought, I've lost my training, I've lost my job, but I can take control of that now. And instead of relying on other corporations to train me and to employ me, then I can forge my own path. And similarly, again, when I lost the ability to walk, that was a very challenging time. My wife was 6 months pregnant, my son was 18 months old, and I went from fully independent and mobile to losing all that in the space of a week. And at first, it felt quite unjust and quite unfair. And yet, having a lot of time to reflect in hospital made me realize that I hadn't been grateful for my mobility. I hadn't been grateful for the people that were now coming to help feed me and shower me. And I hadn't been grateful for all the opportunities of growing up in the first world, the free education, the free healthcare, the freedom to set up a company, and all the opportunities and qualifications and educational chances that I'd had. And that just made me realize in so many ways that my own health outcomes, well, I needed to be proactive, attack the disease as much as it was attacking me, and really try to be purposeful in my own direction. And I had a real big power of why. I wanted to play with the children, my children in the garden, and be back on my feet. And when it was hard, that vision, that identity drove me to keep pushing. And after 11 months, I walked a mile. And ever since then, I've been pushing the boundary further. And that for me is the adventure that I've been on. And yet that now shapes what I do as an individual and as a company.
Yeah, I love that, Lee. Life has certainly been an adventure. You've gone beyond your comfort zone so many times, and every time you've done that, you've come out on the other end victorious. And I want to congratulate you for that. For anyone who is tuning into this conversation, what kind of advice would you give them?
I would say that we all go through life and have challenges. And yet life is one big adventure and it's one big experiment. So really, we all have to try and forge our path and begin to understand what our purpose and our missions are. And that really starts with looking back at the past and reflecting and looking back at our failures and picking them apart rather than looking at them with emotion and feeling, oh, that wasn't great. Just look, because there's always a bit of treasure and a bit of knowledge in each of our failures and our mistakes. And quite often they can really help you identify what it is that you can do best, what it is that you can bring to the world. And when you start to understand what that is, take ownership. So always be proactive, always look to learn, to develop, and to evolve, and start to ask yourself powerful questions and listen to people very actively. Not so much thinking what you're going to say next, but listen and hear what's not being said and just absorb the knowledge of others and look for mentors and people who've already gone on the path that you have. They've made the mistakes and you can always leverage and learn from them to make your path shorter and to make your ascent that bit easier.
I love that, Lee. So I want to thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for your time, and I wish you the very best. And I'm going to say thank you for being here, and thank you for your time. And we appreciate your advice and suggestions to living a truly fulfilling and life that is infused with wellness today. So thank you, Lee.
It's been a privilege, Alina.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Heart Centered Life podcast. Make sure to visit our website www.elinaboyd.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. If you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. Be sure to check out some of our programs on how to cultivate, create, communicate, and inspire others from a heart-centered space. Tune in next week for our next episode where we will help you find a place of deep happiness so that you can meet the world's deep hunger and watch miracles unfold.